What's up, guys? So today we're going to be doing a Monarch deck profile. I think that this deck is really, really good and potentially even competitive in a rogue standpoint. One of the things that it does best is tribute summon, as we all know. But one of the other things that it does that is giving it an infamous title is its brickiness. So what we try to do is we try to give as many consistency cards as possible. So a lot of you might be looking at this and see this is quite a sussy build I have here. So I think that this is actually the perfect deck. I've been working with this for a while and I've had quite a few wins with it. So I'm just going to be going through the card by card. And first we have Erebus, the Underworld Monarch. This card says you can tribute summon this card by tributing one tribute summon monster. If this card is tribute summon, you can send two Monarch Expulsion Trap cards from with different names from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and if you do, shuffle one card from your opponent's hand at random, graveyard, or side of the field to their deck. Once per turn during either player's main phase, if this card is in the graveyard, you can discard one Monarch spell/trap card and target one monster in your graveyard with 2400 or more attack and 1000 defense added to your hand. Okay, so there's a couple things with this card. One, this card is a hand loop, which is absolutely insane. And it can send and the cost is actually like really good. The cost you could send will be usually Pantheism and the Prime Monarch. These are usually your best two targets. We'll go over what those do later, but it's definitely a really good target, those two. So next we have Caius the Mega Monarch. This card, just like all the other monarchs, can be tribute summoned by tributing one tribute summon monster. When it's tribute summoned, you can target one card in the field, banish it, and if you do, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. Then if it's a dark monster card, banish all cards with that name from the hand, main deck, extra deck, and graveyard of the player who controlled it. If this card was tribute summoned using a dark monster, add this additional effect, you can target two monsters instead. So this card is very crazy in time and will usually beat your opponent when you have this card. If for whatever reason you go into time, I couldn't imagine why you'd go into time. So this card also is really broken in the fact that it can basically out all of your players or all of your opponent's cards that have that name. So say if you ban, and considering the fact that this is a dark card or that it banishes a dark monster, which is the majority of the most broken cards in the game, you can get rid of a lot of really annoying cards in the entire game. So this card is pretty good, but I only play it at one because we usually use it for beating the opponent in time, which, to be honest, we go into quite a bit when we have cards like Vanity's Fiend, which we'll get into later. Next, we have Ether, the Heavenly Monarch. If this card is tribute summon, you can send two Monarch spells and trap cards with different names from your hand and or deck to the graveyard. And if you do, special summon one monster with 2400 or more attack and 1000 defense from your deck, or return it to the hand during the end phase. If during your opponent's main phase, you can banish. If this card is in your hand, you can banish one Monarch spell or trap from your graveyard immediately after this effect resolves. Tribute summon this card. This is a quick effect. This card is really good because it either can add a beat stick to your field, so you can do a ton of damage during your second turn, but it also acts as a really good way to really just defeat your opponent on their turn. Because when you have cards like the Monarch Stormforth, when you have Ether, what you can do is you can tribute their monster, summon this card using their card, and there you go. You just have a new monster, and then you can activate its effect, and you've got recovery for the next turn, which is really broken. We'll get into Stormforth later, but you'll see the synergy between these two cards. And the other thing is the cost. Just like Erebus, these two cards, when sent to graveyard, have crazy effects, almost as good, if not arguably better, than the ones that they have when you have them in your hand and you activate them. So that's pretty crazy. Next, we have Vanity's Ruler. This card is not fun to play against, but you have to do what you have to do when you're playing Monarch. It cannot be special summoned, which is fine for this deck. Your opponent cannot special summon monsters. Very simple effect. We special summon a fair amount of times in this deck. So something like Vanity's Ruler is just way better than Vanity's Fiend, which blocks both of us out of doing it. So I would definitely say Vanity's Ruler is better when you get on the board. It's just harder to do so. And then we have Majesty's Fiend, which locks both players out of monster effects. Not a huge deal, especially when the opponent usually just dies when you activate this card. So it's just significantly better for you than it is bad. Next, we have Vanity's Fiend. Neither player can special summon monsters. Definitely not a fun card. I do not. These cards are completely toxic, but you have to do what you have to do. Uh, so your opponent's completely locked out of special summoning. You can't special summon. That's kind of annoying for your deck, but when you just sit on Vanity's Fiend, it can completely defeat your opponent just by existing. And not all players have outs to cards like this, especially when most decks in this format are just piles of gas, and they just want to play as much gas as possible to just do as much as they can. So Vanity's Fiend and Majesty's Fiend both basically just say you win against any Super Heavy Samurai player. So they're pretty good. They're just not fun. So Eidos, the Underworld Squire. This card says if it's normal special summon during your main phase this turn, you contribute summon one monster in addition to your normal summon set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. If you banish this card from your graveyard, you can target one monster with 800 attack, 1000 defense in your graveyard, except Eidos, the Underworld Squire. Special summon in defense position. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn. You can only use this effect of Eidos, the Underworld Squire once per turn. This by itself isn't that good of a card. We played two instead of three, which fits the Idia effect. However, uh, this card is decent when you draw it. If you have some like Vanity's Fiend or Majesty's Fiend in conjunction, because then it's just normal summon effect, summon one of these, which is pretty game winning in a lot of circumstances. But generally, this is a pretty bad card to draw. We only play two for dodging desires, and because then you can have more of a grind game, which this deck goes into a lot with these three cards in the deck. Then we have Idia, the Heavenly Squire. This card is crazy. This card says if it's a normal special summon, you can special summon one monster with 800 attack, 1000 defense from your deck in defense position, except Idia, the Heavenly Squire. Also, you cannot special summon monster in the extra deck for the rest of the turn. If this card is sent to your graveyard, you can target one of your banished monarch spells and traps, add it to your hand. You can only use each effect of Idia, the Heavenly Squire once per turn. So basically, what this card does is you normal or special summon it. Generally, you normal summon it. That's kind of what this deck does. Sometimes you can use one for one to special summon this card out. But when you just summon it, summon Eidos, effective Eidos. Now you've got two monsters to tribute summon, and you're pretty much just good to go from there. And then they have really good graveyard effects that can basically help you do it again. We play three because the most often you basically want this in your opening hand, assuming that you don't draw any of the other starters in your deck. So this is one of the best cards in your deck. Probably will be for the rest of time. I can't see Monarch getting too much support anytime soon, but who knows? I'm hoping, but we'll see. Next, we have Reinforcement of the Army, purely just to search Idia. It's that good in the sec, one for one, purely just for Idia again. Sometimes you draw too many of these big Monarch cards and you can't summon them all, right? So you just want to go one for one, get rid of one of these cards, summon out Idia. Its effect is normal or special summoned. Effect, summon Eos, and then summon one of the other ones from your hand, which is pretty good. They can be bricks, usually in hands where you can't do anything. But if you're bricked that bad, then you're kind of just screwed anyway, especially when you're playing someone like Monarch, who basically needs to be as consistent as possible to do literally anything in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah. Next, we have the Prime Monarch. This card is a 3 of, 1 to dodge desires, but 2 because its on-field effect is really good for the grind game, and its graveyard effect is unbelievably good just in general. So this card says, once per turn, you can target 2 Monarch spells or traps in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, and if you do, draw 1 card. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish 1 other Monarch spell or trap from your graveyard, special summon this card in defense position as a normal monster. Fairy, light, level 5, attack, or attack 1000, defense 2400. This card is not treated as a trap. You can only use this effect of the Prime Monarch once per turn. So this card can basically just be free tribute fodder, uh, which is pretty good considering that's like the only thing this deck really needs consistently. Because somehow you always seem to draw these. If you don't, then you just lose. Which is why we're playing 9 copies in a 40-card deck, which is pretty good. And then the Prime Monarch also can shuffle things back, like, oh, Domain, you ran out of those. There you go. You got a new one. You need Tenacity. You need Pantheism. You need pretty much anything. The Prime Monarch is basically your go-to. So this card's a pretty good on-field effect. It's not insane, but it's pretty good for the grind game. Like I said, we always go into grind game because these cards exist in our deck. Next, we have Pantheism of the Monarchs. This card is one of the favorite cards of any Monarch player to see in our hand. So this card says, send 1 Monarch spell or trap card from your hand to the graveyard, draw 2 cards. Which by itself is absolutely insane. And then, if that wasn't enough, you can banish this card from your graveyard, reveal 3 Monarch spell or trap cards from your deck. Your opponent chooses 1 for you, add it to your hand. And if you do, shuffle the rest back into your deck. You can only use this effect of Pantheism of the Monarchs once per turn. Okay. This is absolutely insane. So not only can you get rid of one of your bricks, which you can brick on a lot. So let's say you have, double domain. You just go Pantheism, discard domain, draw 2. Then you can get, you can make your opponent choose Tenacity, March, Return before you would go into your tribute summon, and then you can, either get one of these off Tenacity, or you basically turn, Erebus or Ether or even one of these 3 into a towers or a turn, so that way you can do that on the next turn, which is insane. And we have the Monarch Stormforth. This card is pretty good. It outs a lot of cards that are very problematic to this deck, like towers especially. This card is really good for outing such things. It is arguably a better card for outing towers than most other decks can play, which I think is insane because it's just Monarchs. This card says, once per turn, if you attribute for a monster for a tribute summon, you could attribute 1 monster your opponent controls even though you do not control it. Seems like Flunderees. You can only activate the Monarch Stormforth once per turn. During the turn you activate this card, you cannot push summon monster from the extra deck. This card's drawback from the extra deck thing only matters for discard. So that's completely fine. And this card just outs towers and gives you a body, which is absolutely insane. When paired with Ether, basically turns this card into like a hand trap almost, that gets rid of their card on their turn, gives you a body, and then helps you summon another body, which goes back to your hand at the end phase, and then you can summon that next turn, and then you just go off and attack for game, which is absolutely insane. Next, we have Terraforming to search Domain of the True Monarchs. Domain of the True Monarchs is a really unfun card to play against, but it's very necessary for this deck and has so much synergy, which is likely to be happening from its name, which is, fair enough. While you have no cards in your extra deck and you're the only player that controls a tribute summon monster, your opponent cannot switch summon monsters from the extra deck. That's just so boring to play against. If a tribute summon monster you control attacks an opponent's monster, it gains 800 attack during damage calculation only. Once per turn, you can reduce the level of one monster with 2,800 attack, 1,000 defense in your hand by 2 until the end of this turn, even after they are summoned set, and even if this card leaves the field. Okay, so it has a built-in floodgate, which is absolutely insane. And 2, it also basically is cost down for the deck. That's absolutely crazy. So let's say you have normal summon Eidos, or whatever his card name is, and you have Domain of the True Monarchs. You go this card, reveal, say, Ether. You summon or use Eidos effect. You tribute summon Ether for just 1 tribute, and then you can immediately activate its effect and then draw one of the, and then summon one of these cards, which is pretty good. Next, we have Pot of Desires. If you've ever played Monarchs, you know that this is Brick City, And you know that we Monarch players are completely down bad for cards that can do these things, like draw two, even if it means getting rid of our good pieces. Um, and we really want to draw cards that help us, obviously, so we can just defeat our opponent, usually by Floodgate. So we really want to take those risks because the high reward is absolutely insane. And it's really hard to out cards like these three when you have like March of the Monarchs on the field. Tribute summon monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. Also, neither player can target them with card effects. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. So this card is pretty bad in conjunction with this card if you draw it. Usually that's not a problem, but sometimes it will be. But this basically turns all of your Monarchs and these unfun floodgates into towers, which is crazy. Tenacity basically says reveal one of your Monarchs or Majesty's Fiend, and then add any one of these Monarch cards to your hand, which is really crazy. Return of the Monarch says you cannot special summon monster from the extra deck. Same problem with this card, but this card is incredibly good for our deck, so we kind of want to take those risks. You cannot special summon monster from the extra deck when you tribute summon a monster, you can activate one of these effects. Add from your deck to your hand one monster with 2400 attack and 1000 defense with a different name from that tribute summon monster. So if you tribute summon for Ether, you can just search Majesty's Fiend, or you can do the exact same thing except it has to have 2800 attack. So basically, you could just go Ether, summon one of these from deck, and then add the other one if you want to your hand. Or you could just simply add Majesty's Fiend for the follow-up, so that way your opponent loses, especially if they're playing Super Heavy Samurai. And in conjunction with March of the Monarchs, no one getting off that board. It's just like complete Floodgate Haven. They lose. GG. Pack it up. Okay, so next we have Time Tearing Morganite, a new card from Cyberstorm Access. This card gives our deck so much power. So one, you cannot activate cards, monster effects in the hand. Okay, we only play hand traps in here, and that only blocks out Ether, which doesn't go off that crazy in our hand usually. Like it's a 2-card combo. It's so much setup. It usually doesn't happen, but when it does happen, it's crazy. So I guess we're blocked out of that. Draw 2 cards instead of 1 for your normal draw during your draw phase. As I discussed with Pot of Desires, we Monarch players are desperate just to draw just a couple cards, because we just live in Brick City. You can normal summon Set 2 times per turn, not just 1. And then if in a sad chance where you draw both, you can banish a card from your graveyard, discard another copy of itself, and then your opponent cannot activate monster effects from normal summon this turn. Okay, so its last effect is not usually that good. Its first drawback, I guess you could call it, doesn't really matter. Its 2 upsides are so crazy for a deck, it feels like this card was built for Monarch. It was either built for Monarch or Flunder, and I don't care about Flunder, so I hope it's for Monarch. This card is the bread and butter of our deck, but we don't want 3 because you only have to play 1 before it's over for your opponent. If you have 3, if you draw 2 for your first turn, that's kind of just like frustrating. So I only play 2. We would play 1, but we kind of are a bit more desperate just to get a couple extra draws. And anyways, Pot of Desires could banish it, so that would be pretty sad. Next we have, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but a crazy card. It's a Pendulum Monster, which seems weird in Monarch, but trust me, once you hear me read it, you'll be very sure why I'm playing it. If you have no cards in your extra deck except this card, you can destroy this card, then draw 1 card. Like I said, we are completely desperate just to have a couple draws, so this is crazy. And then cannot be normal summon set, must be special summon from your face-up extra deck by having no cards in your extra deck except this card. You can only special summon this card once per turn this way. If this face-up card leaves a monster zone, or if this face-up card in a monster zone leaves the field, banish it. Okay, so a couple things here. So first thing, its draw effect is absolutely crazy because we're, like I said, we're very desperate just for a couple draws. And but two, this card also allows us to have a free tribute fodder, which is absolutely crazy. So that we definitely want to play 3 of this card. We want to max out as many copies as possible. You see this card, it's over for your opponent. It's absolutely insane. Next we have Proofless. If you control no special summon monsters, not usually a problem, you can special summon this card from your hand. Also, you can special summon other monsters for the rest of this turn. You can only use this effect of Proofless once per turn. If this card is normal or special summon, you can accept during the damage step. Immediately after this effect resolves, tribute summon 1 monster. This card isn't all that crazy, but with how our deck has to be playing a minimum of 40 cards, this card is probably the best card to fill up that 1 extra slot. I would say it's definitely the best one, actually, because it's just free tribute fodder in addition to your normal summon set, which is pretty good. It's just like a free tribute monster. So let's say you're playing against Super Heavy Samurai. You special summon Proof of Proofless, activate its effect, summon Magi's Fiend, you win, which is pretty crazy. In the side deck, we play Double Nibiru, just for those occasional matchups when you're playing against Hero. They just auto lose to this card, so you might as well just play it. Ash Blossom, same thing. It doesn't usually make sense to play cards specifically to beat Hero, but I play against so much Hero. With how weak that deck is to a singular hand trap, it's just crazy. Then we have the double Imperm that can really do well against certain matchups. You usually don't side into it, but it's just good to have it. Next, we have Evenly Matched. Breaks a ton of boards. We don't usually play it. We don't usually side out of our main deck usually, but it's just good to have some more options. Next, we have Jinzo. This card's these are all just back row hate, realistically. So Jinzo, let's say you're playing against Labyrinth. If they're waiting on you to do a couple things, let's say you side out of Majesty's Fiend or Vendi's Fiend or even Vendi's Ruler, you just normal summon Jinzo. The Labyrinth player basically just loses at that moment, and just like normal summon Jinzo in 2023 actually is broken against Labyrinth. And then we just have Harpy's Feather Duster and Lightning Storm just for more macro. This is also just a disable strike enemy.